Well, hello, this is Dr. Sanchez. Welcome to Ask a Doc podcast. I am your host today. Actually, I am your host every day. Isn't that amazing? Well, this is because this is my podcast where you get to ask a question to a doctor yourself. And this is not a show where you call in. There is no phone number to call for questions. You can actually download an app that's called the Medici app. That's Medici. And through this app, you can ask your doctor a question and about things that you're interested in listening about and things that you're curious about. Now, this podcast was inspired by coronavirus. There was just a lot of misinformation out there by people who really just shouldn't be put information out there. Let's just say it that way. I'll be nice. And so I thought, well, I'm a doctor. I kind of know a few things, and so maybe I'll go ahead and start a podcast. And I talk about all sorts of things. I previously talked about coronavirus, but today we're gonna switch up gears, and because we're on this journey. I won't say a health kick because I don't like that term, health kick. We're on this journey of weight loss, eating healthy, exercising, and so I want to be able to offer some information for sure. And today it's a little bit about weight loss, but today it's going to be about protein. So the question is how much protein do I really need? And what do you think about protein supplements, etc.? And so I'll talk about supplements here in a little bit. But I wanted to talk about a little bit about at least where some of this interest in protein comes from. I think the idea about protein consumption is that those who are healthy, they have a higher percentage of their diet that comes from protein, and therefore, if you eat protein, therefore you're going to lose weight. And there's a little bit of truth to that, but it's about the big picture, right? Because there's other macronutrients that matter. So that's one issue, and also the type of protein matters greatly. And I want to emphasize that not all protein is created equally. There are good sources of protein and there are bad sources of protein, and we'll dive into that. So it's just not a simple yes or no, high protein or not. And so in terms of weight loss, I would say that it is true that if you eat fewer carbohydrates, although there are some really good carbohydrates that I wouldn't ditch, right? I wouldn't just throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are certain carbohydrates. For example, I talked about a lot in depth of fiber, which is a form of carbs, and how oatmeal is a fantastic carb, how it can reduce heart disease and as well as reduce the rates of diabetes, as well as hearts and stroke rates, as well as heart disease and as well as cancers, and so, but it is and with the same thing of where not all proteins are created the same, not all carbs are created the same, and so we should consume some amount of carbohydrates, but I would say that our American Western culture has overdone carbs for a long, long time. And if we cut back on the carbs, then, like, for example, in the Atkins diet, then and as well as the keto diet, then you're going to lose the weight. It compares to maybe some other diets. Well, you lose the weight faster, I'll say it that way. But there's some research to demonstrate that those who are most successful are the ones that don't give up on their diet, regardless of what they pick. Regardless of what any kind of diet, there's no one diet particularly that's superior. But that's the background information as to why we started getting onto this protein kind of frenzy almost, to be honest with you. I mean, everything was about protein. So the question is going to be, how much protein do we need? And so it kind of depends. And it's not easy to calculate, but I'm going to give you some guidance in how to figure out how much protein that you need. And it depends on really like your height, your gender, how active you are. If you're more active, you need more protein. If you're less active, you need less protein. But in general, people need about 10 to 35% of their total caloric intakes. That's 10 to 35% of their total caloric intake should come from some form of protein. Keep in mind that not all protein is created equal. It's just saying protein in general. And so and that's tricky because you got to figure out, well, how many calories are you supposed to consume? And that's a tricky question, right? And the application of like, okay, once I have that percentage, right, then like how many milligrams or how many ounces of protein, and there's a lot of math involved. And so, and I like to think I'm a pretty smart person. I don't know. But it was kind of a challenge for me to figure it out as to my own percentage of protein that I need. And so I found this website that you might want to consider, and it also shows you how many. It's a calculator that tells you how many. I'm looking it up right now. Here we go. It tells you how many milligrams or ounces that you need. And so anyway, it's called www.calculator.net. And when you go there, if you go to that website, that's www.calculator.net. And they have all sorts of not just for health, but they have things like for financial stuff and math calculators. But if you go down to the middle of the page, there's this thing called fitness and health calculators. And so you just click that, and there's a search bar where you just type in protein. It's hard to find, but you just type in protein, and then it shows up a protein calculator. And so when you type in the protein calculator, it kind of asks you questions about your age, gender, how tall you are, and then like if you're active or not. I found myself being a little generous in how active I am. And so have a realistic perspective of how active you are. And then it will calculate out how many grams of protein you need per day, which is really helpful. It gives out the ADA recommendation, the CDC, which is what I go off of, and as well as the WHO. But according to the CDC's recommendation, which is the 10 to 35%, then I will personally need about 58 to 202 grams per day of protein. And once you have that number, then you can kind of like go through the second chart, which I will I'll go ahead and link it to the description of the show today. I'll go ahead and link the some references that I have. And so as far as the types of proteins that that are commonly consumed, and then how many milligrams there are, and then how many ounces or how many cups you'll need. And so so an example would be, say that you decide that I want to go ahead and do like salmon, right? So salmon has about 22 grams. Well, let me do like herring, for example, because I already have that calculator. Let me get my little cheat sheet here. So like I already figured out that based off of my requirements of 65 to 227.5 grams of protein. So based off the chart, which I'll share with you, that Atlantic herring, which is a great source of protein, by the way. I love it. It's a fish. It's fantastic. It's sustainable. So I figured out based off of the charts, which it's around 22. Then I'll need about 13 to 45 ounces. And so, so you just kind of calculate out, do a little math to convert your grams that you have to ounces. And that, because otherwise you're gonna have to figure out like how many calories you need total. And then from there you calculate the percentage. And it's like, okay, that's the percentage of calories, but then how do you figure out of calories, per protein? And so actually every gram has about 4 calories, so you have to divide by 4, and then finally you get your grams, and then you have to convert from grams to ounces or cups. And then so, which, I mean, it's a fun exercise of math, right? So but it was just a little bit detailed, a little bit harder to figure out. But I think that trying it at least once and going through the math will be helpful. So there's 2 ways to do it, right? So one way is to go to the calculator website and figure out how many grams you need. The other option is go to the link that I'll provide to as far as like how many calories you need per day, and then it's a big chart, and you just look at like if you're active or not, and then from there, as well as your age, and you figure out how many calories you are, and then from that you figure out the percentage. So man, it's just a lot. It's like, woo, no wonder we have a hard time figuring it out. But if you just kind of figure about 2,000 calories, right? If you figure about 2,000 calories, then I'll go ahead and submit a second chart about how many servings you'll need, and then per serving how many ounces. And I think that'll be easier that way. If you just kind of look at the USDA recommendations for different food groups, then I think that's probably going to help you a bit more. So if you haven't dozed off from all the math, wake up! What? I was just yeah. You're like, it's awful, this math stuff. No, I mean, I actually used to like math a lot, but as I've gotten older, I've gotten worse. That's okay. But I still need it, right? It's still important. All you kids out there who are in school, you need math, right? Well, really, it's conversions. I think conversion is probably the most important math aspect of things. All right. So I said that I'll come back to you as far as the ounces you need. But I briefly talked about how not every protein source is the same, and it's true. So let me talk about the proteins. There's different protein sources, right? So there's animal protein, plant. So of that, there's going to be red meat, and then also like fish. And there's plant-based protein, which is going to be like seeds, nuts, as well as beans, right? So that's the plant-based. And then you got like synthetic produced, which is going to be supplements, your protein shakes, and your whey, and it comes in like these big jugs, and big like burly muscular men come and they sell it to you, right? And so the problem is that we like overdose on protein on those who are doing protein shakes. And so but Dr. Sanchez, I'm very careful about how much I use. It says it on right there. And like the problem is that like like if you're going to do protein shakes, which I highly discourage anyway, you gotta figure out your math and do your math correctly based off of the 10 to 35% rule that I described. You figure out your total caloric intake that you need, and then of that number, you do 10 to 35% of that. Or you go to the website I described and you figure out, you calculate that. And then from there, you can safely, provide it. And safely is a big deal because protein supplements, and I've seen this, not a whole lot, but it happens where people who you can overdose on protein, by the way. I don't know if you know this, but I've seen people who overdosed on protein shakes and went into renal failure. And these are young people who are generally healthy without previous kidney problems, who screwed up their own kidneys because they actually overdid the protein, because they just thought that if they had consumed more protein, then they would actually be beefier in their muscles. And that's just not true. So it was just needless. So I highly, highly discourage protein supplements. And also it over and over again, when I look at the research, it just appears to me that when something is synthesized, when it's produced, it kind of like is bad for you. Has it been proven that protein shakes are bad for you? No, it has not. But it's not natural. It's just not natural. And I always tell people that nowhere in nature do you find supplements. You don't go into like a forest that's natural and you find a jug of protein shakes like coming off of a tree. And you're like, how did I didn't know like a tree could produce protein shakes. No, it doesn't. It's not coming from the earth or it's processed. Right, so we know that processed meats are like the bacon and sausage are bad for you. We know that. So then, why is it that processed protein powder? How is that get a free ride? I don't know. Probably because it's not. I don't know. It's probably not regulated by the FDA and et cetera. And it gets kind of it gets off easy. And so, there's that. That's my little my rant on protein shakes. Okay, so like now let's go back to like the natural form. So we talked about like red meats, right? Of the red meats, we know that processed meats are the worst, right? Processed meats are bacon and as well as sausage, ham, and there's like corned beef, cured meats, and what's the other one? I was thinking about it. Beef jerky, right? So all those are going to be processed and potentially cancer causing. Although minimally cancer causing, but if you're somebody who has a family history of cancer, then you kind of want to like pay attention. Okay, now amongst plant-based, there is so beans, there is seeds, and then also there are nuts. So those are the big three plant-based. Now the healthy what do you call it? Fish-based, right? So so like fish-based, particularly if I could pick one, although I would say that any fish is going to be better than red meats. Like if it's tilapia, which is void of any omega-3 fatty acids, and you eat tilapia, and that's the only fish source that you can consume, then it's going to be a lot better than eating any kind of red meat, because at least you're getting the cancer reduction from colorectal cancer reduction from having some kind of fish. Now, if you go online and you look about like, hey, well, I heard that fish is bad for you because it has mercury. You should do your research, Dr. Sanchez. And I was like, hold on. I did do my research. I promise you I did. And, and so not all fish has mercury in it. The fish that tends to have mercury are going to be like your big predator fishes, right? So you can think about it. The big predator fish, they eat a lot of prey fish, and they accumulate mercury, and so they're going to have a lot more concentrated mercury within their body. So it's going to be things like shark and swordfish, tilefish. I mean, not many people eat those predator fish, and so those are the ones that have a little bit too much mercury. And I'll have a thing just on fish someday, and I'll just go over in detail all the fish to avoid that have too much mercury in it. And so, but your common fish is going to be tilapia, tuna, and salmon. Those are what are most consumed. Those do not have high levels of mercury. And you might I'll show you exactly the types of fish that are bad later at another show. So, but if you do like just tilapia, then you're going to get at least like the cancer reduction and from that. And I've read that there's like recommendations for 2 times a week for having some kind of fish. But I've read research that actually having like more than 4 times a week would actually be beneficial. It's like this dose relationship, meaning that the more you consume, the greater the benefit in terms of cancer reduction. With cardiovascular disease, it kind of caps at 2 days a week. But if you and so in terms of, there's not greater benefit if you consume fish every day in terms of cardiovascular disease. But for colorectal cancer reduction, it's actually about 4 times a week of fish reduction. I'm sorry, of eating fish that can actually reduce colorectal cancer. So now, if you want to get like the ideal fish, it's going to require 3 factors. It's going to be that it helps reduce your rate of colorectal cancer. It reduces your rate of having heart disease because it has omega-3 fatty acids, which is going to be some of the fatty fish. And then finally, I include the factor called the sustainable factor, because some of these fish that are overproduced or overfarmed will actually produce disease to the surrounding population of fish. And so those are the 3 things that I kind of consider. Like I consider those 3 things. If the last one's not a thing for you, then I'll talk to you later. Let's chat. So, but if you look at those 3 things, then I would say that Atlantic herring is probably your best bet because it satisfies those 3 things. So it helps reduce colorectal cancer. Number 2 is that it is considered a fatty fish and helps reduce developing cardiovascular disease. And then finally, it is a fish that we can eat that is more sustainable than other fish. So salmon is my number 2 pick, and it does help. Again, it does help prevent colorectal disease. It does help reduce cardiovascular disease because it is a fatty fish, but it is less sustainable. because the manner of farming that they use, they do like in the ocean farming. They don't do above ground farming for their fish. They do in native waters. And so when they do farming in the native waters, they're very densely populated. And when you have any animal that is unnaturally densely populated, then they're much more prone to disease. You're going to have to use antibiotics or some other chemicals to suppress the disease. But the problem is that because it's in native waters, that disease, that bacteria leaches out of those waters because there's nothing separating it. The bacteria can cross the netting, and will infect the surrounding indigenous fish for the salmon. And so farming salmon and getting like farming salmon is cheaper, but it comes at a consequence of it actually hurting the native fish. And so if you want to do something sustainable that's beneficial and you like salmon, then I would do like the wild salmon. It's much more expensive. There's no difference in terms of health, but it is a sustainable fish. And so for that reason, I tend to prefer the Atlantic herring. There's some sardines out there that might be beneficial as well. Some of the smaller fish, and so, but we'll do another topic about that. But I wanted to kind of have a broad scope talk about just protein in general. And so my preference is about 4 times a week. And if you just shoot for 2 times a week, fantastic. So now let's talk. And then as far as like the plant-based, so it's going to be the nuts, and so let's talk about like the nuts. So like peanuts are great, right? So the problem with nuts is that they're salted. And that just ruins it. And just humanity has a way of just ruining stuff that's good for us. I don't know. It's over and over again. It just appears that way. And you have to like purposely look for the unsalted peanuts to be able to help you. Another example of just ruining stuff, like for example, oatmeal. They put synthetic sugar in oatmeal, and you're like, you're just ruining something that's beautiful. Why are you doing that? I want to cry all the time. Why do you ruin something that's just beautiful and it's just natural? Why do you got to just taint it with stuff that's crappy? So just find nuts that don't have salt in it. Just unsalted, not lightly salted. I mean, that's just like that's wrong, right? Just go all the way, get the natural stuff, right? So peanuts, I don't have a problem with peanuts. I like them, but I think they're good. But if you want the best for health, it's going to be almonds and walnuts. And they have great levels of magnesium, which reduces colorectal cancer. They have wonderful sources of fiber. They have protein that's beneficial. They can help reduce your risk of having cardiovascular disease as well as developing heart disease. So like nuts are just go nutty for nuts, right? I had to go there. So go nutty for nuts. It is wonderful. Eat them every day. They're fantastic. And so if you're like, hey, like say fish is 4 times a week, and then you got 5, 6, so 3, so like 7 days a week, right? Here I am with my math again. So there's 3 days where you're like, okay, I'm going to go vegetarian completely, and 3 days a week, then you could do plant-based source of protein. You can do the math and figure it out, or if you don't want to, that's fine. But like you can like eat just nuts for your source of protein. And so and then okay, so let's just proceed forward. Let's talk about seeds. So seeds are great. I love them. They're fantastic. And with seeds, they're going to be so there's like sesame seeds, there's sunflower seeds, unsalted, by the way. Like, why do they ruin it? I mean, anyway. But like the one that has the most omega-3s is going to be flaxseed. I love flaxseed. It does help reduce your rate of colorectal cancer, but because of the omega-3 fatty acids found in flaxseed, then you're going to reduce your rate of having heart disease. But you can't just get flaxseed. You have to get the whole flaxseed. You know how I talk about like whole grains, where they keep the skin of the grain or the coating. And so the same thing with like the flaxseed. So they a lot of times when they process flaxseed, they just get the oil. The oil doesn't have that same benefit as the actual seed itself when you include the coats to it, because we think that the flax lignin, the coating of the seed, is actually where we get the benefit. And so that's like my favorite seed to consume because it kind of hits more than one topic. Okay. And then in terms of beans, So the most potent bean in terms of concentration of protein are going to be your pinto beans. So that is the most, if you're like really needing to have a potent concentrated source of protein and you're like going vegetarian, or if you and you want to replace animal protein with a plant-based protein, then I would say that pinto beans is number one, and then black beans is around number two. If you want to get a source of bean that actually includes other things, so that might be beneficial. That includes like what's called isoflavins. So soybeans, also known as edamame beans. So those beans they have another purpose besides providing protein. They do have a good source of protein, but because of their soy, it can actually reduce your rate of developing lung disease or lung cancer rather. It helps reduce your rate of developing breast cancer as well as prostate cancer. So that bean is kind of a super bean that I call it. I made up that word, by the way, super bean. So that's a wonderful bean to consume. And I'll include like links to look at how many milligrams or grams I have to consume to satisfy your percentage, right? What's that number percentage again? Oh yeah, there you go. It's the 10 to 35%. So like to satisfy your 10 to 35% of your protein, if you want to go completely plant-based and you don't want to bother with the fish or the red meat and you just want to go plant-based, then by all means, I think it's fantastic. I think you're missing out on omega-3 fatty acids. We don't know if fish oil actually does much. The research kind of goes back and forth. And so when that happens, when I start seeing fish oil pills being sold, and 1 year the research is good, and another year research says it doesn't do anything, it kind of makes me think that, well, it's probably a small benefit. Then, if you're so how about like plankton? Like I think there's like ocean-based omega-3 fatty acids. I think I saw that one time. I can't make any comment of that. I don't see a whole lot of research to support or to refute that. But in my mind, again, it's the whole idea of like, I mean, pills are not found naturally, right? So like, is it natural? Well, sort of. But what's more natural is actually eating the actual fish. If you're going to go ahead and buy and take omega-3 fatty acids. But who knows? Maybe next year I'll like change my mind as far as how I think. And so those are the thoughts that I have in terms of that. So I think I promised you how many serving sizes you should get. Okay, I'm going to look at the USDA recommendation. And this is based off of 2,000 calories per day, which this is kind of inaccurate because maybe you you consume less than 2,000 calories or you consume more. But in general, if you go based off of a 2,000 calorie diet, then your protein foods needs to be about 5.5 ounces or equivalent ounces. So that might mean 8 servings of seafood, and so maybe 5 servings of nuts, soy products, and so how about eggs, right? So I don't know. I mean, there's not a whole lot of research to say yes or no is are eggs bad for you. I met a lady. She enrolled in a study that I think in the study she ate like 12 eggs a day. I mean, her cholesterol was awful. And so it was a big change, before consuming 12 eggs a day to afterwards, and the cholesterol was like, wow, that's really bad. I think that like eating 2 eggs a day is probably fine. But I mean, I think it's I don't know, it's okay. Now, for those who are concerned about like, aren't you going to develop protein deficiency or some kind of deficiency if you don't eat red meats? Like if you just Dr. Sanchez keep like talking about like going red meatless, is that a word? Red meatless? You keep saying like, don't consider, reducing red meat or eliminating red meat altogether, but aren't you going to like miss out on types of minerals and vitamins that we all need? And the answer is yes. And so the main vitamin that we miss in not consuming red meats is going to be vitamin B12. But the problem, here's the thing though, we think we need like all this B12, but that's not true. The only exception are going to be those who are pregnant or expecting to become pregnant, right? They do need good amounts of B12. but there are other sources of B12 that are not red meat based. So and actually, red meat isn't the leader in terms of B12 vitamins. In fact, so clams are, they are the most potent sources of B12. And in fact, 3 ounces of clams is about 3,000%, 3,500% of your daily requirement. Can you imagine? Like just 3 ounces. So, really, and there's other sources of B12. So for example, like eggs has a good amount of B12. It has about 25% of your daily intake. And so you have to eat 4 eggs, which, that I think that's too much. But so like cheese has B12 into it. So like Swiss is going to be my favorite. So you can have like 2 eggs and 1 cheese, and that will completely satisfy your B12 requirement for the day. Again, this is going to be based off adults. Children need less, and pregnant women need more. And so trout has a good amount of B12. Salmon has about 200% of your requirements with just 3 ounces. So salmon is perfect, right? Just because it's not like super dosing, right? It's okay. Liver is a good source. So if you want like a animal source, so any liver of any kind, right? So liver of any, like, chicken liver, cow liver. So that's a really wonderful source of B12. And so it's really hard to become B12 deficient if you're eating any kind of animal product. And so you do fish, like tuna fish. It has about 100% of your requirement for B12 with just 3 ounces. And fish is fantastic for you. It's wonderful. So I don't know. You don't necessarily have to go all beef. And so the other thing that people wonder about is going to be, well, how about your iron? So your iron, are you going to become iron deficient, particularly in women who are menstruating or women who are pregnant? So they're a little more prone to developing iron deficiency. So, well, I mean, I think, yeah, sure, right? But like you're going to need meat. If you're worried about the iron, you obviously can take iron pills. But that makes you constipated. But so like liver, again, has a good source of iron. So just have some liver and onions. And cream of wheat is a good source of fortified iron. So you can have cream of wheat. You don't have to eat meat all the time. And then I think that's really about it. So B12, iron, and then we talked about the protein. So those are the 3 things. So am I anti-cow or something? I'm like, kind of, especially if you look at like the consequences downstream that a lot of people really don't consider. I'll give you an example of some consequences of our habits of meat consumption. So one of the things that occurs is that it's cattle raising is a very inefficient utilization of land for the amount of protein you get per acre. So if you compare, for example, small animals that we raise, so for example, like chickens or even like meat chickens or meat rabbits, if you compare your square footage or like as far as acreage, you get much more protein per acre if you utilize small animals. Also, moreover, the amount of water that is required to grow the corn or the hay that is used to feed cattle is also very, very inefficient. It's a huge consumption of water to grow the feed that goes to feed the cattle, whereas small animals are much more efficient in terms of production of protein. With the winner of the most efficient winner in terms of land utilization and in terms of water utilization, which by the way is not a small thing because we are in the state of Texas. Water is a great resource that is kind of coming up to short supply, and every 3 to 4 years we have this drought, and we're like, it's kind of like talked about in the news and in the public. And you're like, well, we could do a better job by changing our diet. And it's not directly obvious, but we can sustain our water supply here in Texas if we simply reduced our meat consumption. as a whole. Here's another thing that maybe we don't consider, but meat is an international product. It is shipped overseas. It is raised overseas and shipped over here. Texas is not the only area where meat is raised. So meat is actually raised in Brazil. And if you care about the rainforest, this is a big deal, because the land that is being utilized for cattle production used to be rainforest in Brazil. And because of our crave, mainly in the United States, Europe may be number 2, but we're the biggest driver for the consumption of red meat, is driving the temptation to cut down rainforest to grow cattle, and that rainforest ain't coming back. Like, once you destroy it, it's not coming back. It was the rainforest was developed at a time at a climate that is no longer today, and if once you destroy the rainforest, it will not come back. And so, and then lastly, beef is one of the biggest methane producers that in our area, in this globe, that is contributing to a lot of the greenhouse gases. Is not just the number of cars that are being driven, but also it's the amount of cows that are being raised that contributes to the methane production and also the greenhouse gas, which is a big contributor to our changing world in terms of our climates. And really, because we want to eat meat, which is bad for us. Where am I missing? Like, is there some crazy logic? Am I the only crazy person? Probably, that sees this, that like being healthy, like in terms of not having colorectal cancer, and if we eat fish as an alternative, reducing our rate of breast cancer, reducing our rate of prostate cancer, and like saving our water source here in Texas, which is a big deal. Does that, I mean, it's just a win-win, and there is no losses. There are no losses besides like maybe the cattle rancher who's bummed out that he can't sell his, I'm like, well, dude, you can make more money actually if you raise meat rabbits. You have to change your infrastructure, but you can produce a way more protein by using meat rabbits, or also doing just raising soybeans. What am I? I'm just a doctor, so what do I know, right? So, but if you ever get into food policy, and the reason why a lot of this is unnaturally done is because people actually want to eat healthy. There's certain policies that our federal government put in place that actually bolsters the meat production and keeps it there. And so I'll just say that for another day for food policy here in our country. Let's just say that the federal government has its recommendations from the FDA as far as what we should be doing, but the policies created in terms of funding our food supply does not correlate with that. And so they don't put their they don't put their money where their mouth is. And so that's just unfortunate. So, but anyway, so that's my thought about protein. We eat way too much red meats. I think we could do better with that. Avoid processed red meats. There are better sources of meats. I think no lean meats that are cooked correctly are not bad for you. But it's like an opportunity loss, because there's like not bad, and then there's like really good, which is going to be fish. So when we eat red meat, even if it's not bad, if you cook it correctly and you choose a lean source, sure, it's not bad, but you're missing out on better. And I think that's the point that I'm getting at, is that we're missing out on better when we don't consume the protein sources that are beneficial, which is going to be like Atlantic herring, so salmon if you wish, as well as protein sources such as nuts and beans and that's beans. Well, there's another one out there. Oh, and seeds. So, well, I hope you guys enjoy our time together. Send me messages through the Medici app. I hope that this is impactful, that every day you are just learning more and becoming more enthused with health. I think that knowledge really is liberating, because the more I learn, actually, I feel like I'm the one who has benefited the most, because it's changing my habits. If we don't learn, I think that we may not get the grasp or the depth of why we should change. our habits. But if we every day as we learn more about food, and I think it's wonderful. I'm right now I'm looking at this little sign I have in the clinic. It's a Bible verse that I have posted on the wall, and I'm gonna read it to you. It's one of my favorite verses that I use to help people consider eating healthy. And because I think that we get this in our heads that like, hey, we're Texans. We drive big trucks and we drink beer and eat meats at football games when we barbecue, right? I think that like that's kind of in our mindset, but that's not how it was in the beginning. Not the beginning of this country, but like the very beginning when God created all things. So in Genesis 1:29, which I think really should supersede our identity as Texans, that our identity as believers of God really should supersede our identity as our habits of what we consume as our culture. So in Genesis 1:29, it says that God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruits. They will be yours for food. And if you look at it, it talks about like how the animals, I give it to you, but not for food. The Bible talks about how that plants were basically food for you and food for animals. The animals were not consumed in the beginning. There was no death, which means there was no death of not only humans, but there was no death of animals either. When God created the Garden of Eden, it was only until the fall of man, when man sinned, was there an allowance for the killing and the consumption of meat. But if you look at the Old Testament, it was a ceremony of killing animals. It was only as a symbol, as a kind of like a ritual to God. For it's like the sacrifice that was given to this animal sacrifice, which sounds draconian, but that's how it was in the Old Testament. But it was a revered thing. It was an honor thing. It wasn't, and you appreciate it because these animals, you raised them yourself, and you saw the value of life that came from these animals, and that was your protein source. Even when God allowed it to occur, He says, "I allow you to eat meat now." But it wasn't like a fast food thing. It was not. We eat red meat as if it like is not. It's like never used to be alive. But we just don't want to think about it. We just like don't want to think about it. But the reality is that truth is that thing you ate really was alive at some point, and we really should put value in it. And we've departed from our agrarian roots to the point where it's divorced, right? We don't think about where our food comes from, and the value that all that put in place to actually consume that which is on your plate, and we take it for granted, and it's almost to a level of disrespect, in my opinion. We should put honor and respect towards how that meat was raised, and not take it for granted. And if anything else, looking at how it was not that way in the beginning, where when all things were perfect, when God created the heavens and the earth, that it was really vegetables and fruits. That was our source of food. Am I suggesting that we consider going vegetarian? I don't think so. I think that the human body has evolved to where it kind of needs a little bit of animal source of protein. My opinion is that fish, as well as maybe some eggs, satisfies that completely. It does. You do not need to have red meats to live, to live, and so. But anyway, all right. Well, that's my end for the show. Hope you enjoy it. I'm now running about 9 minutes late for my next patient, so they'll forgive me, right? Y'all are nice for me. All right, y'all have a fantastic day. You have a good one. Bye bye.